And just expressing gratitude again, Al and everybody at Kelly House, and Alan and Rabbi Pollack, Leona, Annette, Carolyn, thanks for being together today. You know, actually, is it Askara, Rabbi? You said the Askara. You know, the Armenian version of this actually has a 40 in it, Hoki Hankist, right, Andy? A Hoki Hankist, and we could extend it. That's 40 days after the decease, so 40 years. So from my Armenian perspective, we have a Hoki Hankist. And I don't want to forget, just as Terrence and I, you know, shared our intense work in genocide studies for 7 years in our lives in the Colgate English department, where we were both kind of outcasts for doing so, but loved our outcast zone. Terrence wrote a great piece on Turkish government denial of the Armenian genocide that came out in the Yale Review in 1984, and it's called On Governing Narratives, the Turkish-Armenian case. So if you want to read some of Terrence's best thinking, he uses a Foucauldian lens through which to crunch down the Ankara propaganda lie project on the Armenian past. It's really good work. And I'm remembering too, just as I'm reflecting on Liz's beautiful reminiscence of her late husband, Terrence giving me an off-print of that article for Christmas of 1984, inscribing it "Glad Tidings." So it's Terrence, you know. It was the kind of, and it was beautiful, and it embodied. Again, I don't want to. I want to say a few things about Terrence as a thinker and a writer, but this is a reminiscence moment. I mean, it embodied my deep friendship with Terrence and our comradeship and colleagueship. And those of you in the academy know that departments can be lonely places where we don't always get along with we don't even find any connection to many of our colleagues. And Terrence and I really felt blessed to be kind of plopped down in this department at a very good liberal arts college, and we both loved teaching there. But we had a great time as intellectual friends. We spent a lot of time together, rapping, drinking, listening to music, talking about. And Terrence was somebody for whom there was no real such thing as small talk. There was just no small talk. It was always about ultimate issues. You know, except, I mean, you know, and the way we talked about food and wine was also, you know, ontological. It wasn't small talk. So anyway, I feel really grateful to have had Terrence's friendship in my professional life for as many years as I did. And had Terrence not died, had that not happened, within a couple of years, we would have all joined forces to start what became the official creative writing program at Colgate. The novelist Frederick Bush and I were the two people who ended up, beginning that project. We didn't have an official program in that sort. We taught workshops, but I emphasize this here because Terrence was a big piece of that. We ended up hiring. It took us a long time to get a good nonfiction writer, and nobody ever could replace Terrence. But I want to emphasize that Terrence was a very gifted, creative nonfiction writer. And one of the reasons I believe that all of us respond to the survivor as we do is because he is such a gifted, creative nonfiction writer. He's a literary writer, he's a belletristic writer, and he has all the gifts of Joan Didion or Hunter Thompson. You know, he's in that genre as well. He's in that genre in a little more invisible way, because of course in The Survivor he's assessing and organizing and analyzing dark, heavy texts. So I mean, he's a formidable scholar. But as a number of you have noted, his métier is not the métier of academic lit crit. He cared about that deeply. He really worshipped in the halls of Northrop Frye, Edmund Wilson. As some of you know, he wrote his dissertation on Shelley. He was a trained Romantic and Victorian scholar. He loved the Victorian essayists, Pater and Arnold. You know, he taught a seminar on Victorian nonfiction prose. So I want to just give you that broader intellectual sense of Terrence, you know, as scholar and artist, because that's, you know, you can have the empathy, you can have the wiring for the connection to the Holocaust survivor experience, and it doesn't mean you're going to produce the survivor. The next piece of that recipe is the literary talent, and I think it's why he's, you know, that the prose of the survivor, you know, has such life and vitality. You know, I want to close by reading a poem, but before, and I don't want to, I mean, you guys have all been so patient, and more people want to speak here tonight as well, and I'd like to say much more about Terrence as literary critic and maker of a poetics, and Carolyn, you know, opened that issue up earlier today, and Terrence's work in poetics and poetry, and his obsession with the fact that poets could be transformative figures for a given culture, and that poetry was an ultimate act of artistic meaning. But there's a lot to say about that, and that's a subject for our next symposium, Al, on Terrence. But so I want to just shift gears and close with just a recollection about another side of Terrence, and that has to do with our annual summer lamb roast. And sometime, you know, I got there in 1980, fresh out of grad school in my late 20s, and sometime, I'd say in the next couple of years, Helen and I, Liz and Terrence, and our friends John Kinect and Lynn Schwartzer, both visual artists, decided we wanted to put on a summer party, and a real summer party, you know. Outdoors, we bought a whole lamb. We spent a couple days basting it, you know, really working this lamb. We built a spit. We created a pit. Now, you have to remember that Terrence lived in this stunning house, the founder's house of Colgate University. The house is built circa 1790, 1800, clapboard federal house, beautiful green shutters, on a hillock, a kind of a grassy knoll, if you will, okay? At the beginning of Preston Hill Road. So he's up there in this federal period house with its 8-on-8s, you know, talking about incredible federal period mullioned windows. Terrence lived on the second floor. Bottom floor wasn't used much, although it was always available for some party stuff. And Terrence's garret was quite picturesque, with a big brick fireplace and a kitchen that looked out into nature with some nice window light. And books, right? It was just a complete den of Terrence's life as a writer, as Liz. Yeah.
Terrence didn't like things that were bourgeois, so we never could have a couch.
Oh, God.
So we just had like mattresses with Ladra's print things on
Yeah.
And I remember, like, one of our first arguments was like,
Yeah, I remember too.
a little bit insecure because I wanted a couch.
Yeah.
And even an elderly relative was coming to visit, and I
Yeah.
was worried about them
Yeah.
like, on the floor. I mean, this was already the early 80s. It was no longer
Right.
the late 60s.
Right.
Anyhow, that was the living room.
Yeah, Terrence really maintained his passion about a kind of anti-bourgeois, a bohemian. he had a kind of bohemian aesthetic, and although he had great taste in wine and some fine things in life, of course. But let me just say, so I want you to picture that house. We would roast that lamb. You know, we would start drinking out of mason jars or jam jars, early afternoon as we're working on the preparations. And Terrence was into the mason jar, jam jar thing long before it became popular in Williams-Sonoma or wherever, as it is now. Everybody's serving things out of mason jars now. But that was part of Terrence's country aesthetic. And we would invite a lot of people. Everybody would bring a dish. And it was an incredible festival. And they were always gorgeous late July days, evenings. It didn't get dark till 9 or later. And it was spirited, and it was about being in the earth, on the grass. The creatures were everywhere, deer, squirrels, butterflies, bees, whatever. It really was. It was an ambience that Terrence loved and felt at home in. And it was very Dionysian and Bacchanalian, and that too is very Terrence. There are many Terrences in the picture, in the complexity of him, but the Dionysian Terrence who liked to roast a lamb on a spit on a July afternoon and have 30 people come over with wine and food, and the conversation was always the same: serious, deep, rich, ongoing. We partied as late as we could. And we did, and we finished we finished it off the next day often, Liz, you'll admit. And which reminds me of one other just aside before I close with this poem, and that is Terrence and Liz coming over on April 14th of 1984 with a big tray of lasagna for my wife then, Helen, who was pregnant, and we all attribute the lasagna to my daughter Sophia's birth only hours later. So there was always a beautiful synergy about that moment. Thank you, Liz, for that inspired lasagna. So, look, I want to read this poem that Terrence loved, as he loved poetry with a sense of life urgency. This is Nasm Hikmat, the Turkish poet who spent most of his life in a Turkish prison. Interestingly, the same Turkish prison that my great uncle spent the summer of 1915 in, with the other 250 Armenian cultural leaders and intellectuals who were arrested on the night of April 24 at the eve of the Armenian genocide. I didn't know Hikmet was in Çankırı as well, but I guess Çankırı was a place where the Turkish state put its intellectuals. On living. Living is no laughing matter. You must live with great seriousness, like a squirrel, for example. Without looking for something beyond and above living. Living must be your whole occupation. Living is no laughing matter. You must take it seriously, so much so, and to such a degree that, for example, your hands tied behind your back to the wall, or else in a laboratory in your white coat and thick glasses, you'll be able to die for people, even for people whose faces you've never seen, even though you know living is the most real, the most beautiful thing. You must take living so seriously that even at 70, for example, you will plant olives, and not so they'll be left for your children either, but because even though you fear death, you don't believe it, because living weighs heavier. Let's say we're seriously ill, need surgery, which is to say there's a chance we won't get up from the white table. Even though it's impossible not to feel sad about going a little too soon, we'll still laugh at the jokes being told. We'll look out the window to see if it's raining, or we'll still wait anxiously for the latest newscast. Let's say we're at the front, for something worth fighting for, say, there in the first offensive, on that very day, we might fall on our face, dead. We'll know this with a curious anger, but we'll still worry ourselves to death about the outcome of the war, which might go on for years. Let's say we're in prison and close to 50, and we have 18 more years, say, before the iron doors will open. We'll still live with the outside, with its people and animals, struggle and wind. I mean with the outside beyond the walls. I mean however and wherever we are, we must live as if one never dies. This earth will grow cold, a star among stars, and one of the smallest, a gilded mote on the blue velvet. I mean this, our great earth. This earth will grow cold one day, not like a heap of ice, or a dead cloud even, but like an empty walnut. It will roll along in pitch black space. You must grieve for this right now. You have to feel this sorrow now, for the world must be loved this much if you're going to say, I lived.